When a regular Tuesday morning at a small Hollywood coffee shop quietly changed two people forever. Neither of them knew it yet. A 19-year-old girl from Boyle Heights was behind the counter. She had taken the metro to work before sunrise. She had changed out of her street clothes in the back bathroom. She had tied her hair up with a rubber band from her wrist. She was ready for an ordinary day. Then a man walked in with a motorcycle helmet under his arm and tired human eyes, and sat down at the counter without looking around the room to see who had noticed him. His name was Keanu Reeves. She slid a menu across the counter and said the oat milk was fresh today, if that mattered to him. He laughed. A real one. He came back the next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and something quiet and enormous and nameless grew between them in the space of coffee orders and long conversations and $20 tips on $4 drinks. Something that never got a label because it never got the chance. Something she carried for 12 years on buses and in break rooms and in the yogurt aisle of a Whole Foods in Scottsdale, Arizona, standing completely still with a basket on her arm and his voice on her phone saying, "Is this a good time?" And then she met Devin, a cardiac surgeon, steady and certain and genuinely, thoroughly good. A man who proposed at golden hour on a Scottsdale rooftop with his grandmother's ring. A man she followed across state lines. A man she stood at an altar for, in an ivory silk dress with olive branches in her hair, on a perfect September afternoon at the Pelican Hill Resort in Newport Beach, with the Pacific Ocean behind her and everyone she loved in front of her. She invited Keanu to the wedding. She told herself it was to say thank you properly, to close something that had been standing open for too long, to do the right thing. He said yes. And on Saturday, September 14th, 2024, at 3:47 in the afternoon, the doors of the outdoor chapel opened, and Keanu Reeves walked down the white pedal aisle in a charcoal suit with no tie and took the only open seat in the room, which was in the front row. And Devin Ashworth, standing at his own altar, looked up and saw him, and froze. Not for 1 second, not for 2, for 11 full seconds. The music thinned. The officiant stopped speaking. Every person in that chapel felt something shift in the air, without being able to say exactly what it was. And the question that sat in every single person in that room was the same question. What does the groom know? What did Marisol never tell him? And what is about to happen to this wedding? Watch the whole video, because the answer will change the way you understand every single moment that came before it. And it starts with a Tuesday morning in 2012 that nobody saw coming, and ends on a balcony above the Pacific Ocean, in the dark, with two people holding onto each other and one man driving home alone through the California night, having done the hardest and rightest thing he has ever done. Stay with us. This one matters. Got it. I'll write chapter 1 at the original outlined word count of 620 words, fully fleshed out as a proper narrative. Here it is. Los Angeles. A Tuesday in March. The city was still waking up. The buses were half full. The sky above Hollywood was that pale gray it gets before the sun burns through. The kind of morning that doesn't promise anything. Marisol Vega was 19 years old, and she was already on her second hour of work. She had taken the metro from Boyle Heights at 5:40 in the morning, standing the whole way because the seats were taken. Her uniform folded in her bag because she didn't like wearing it on the train. She changed in the small bathroom at the back of Groundwork Coffee on Cahuenga Boulevard before her shift started, tied her hair back with a rubber band from her wrist, and was behind the counter by 6. Groundwork was a real place, still is. It sits on Cahuenga Boulevard in Hollywood, and it smells the way the best coffee shops smell, like dark roast and old wood, and something slightly burnt that should bother you but doesn't. The floors were scuffed from years of people who had somewhere to be. The espresso machine was loud and temperamental. The tips were modest on a good day. Marisol had been working there for 7 months. She knew the regulars by order before she knew them by name. The woman who wanted oat milk and no foam and always looked like she had been crying. The old man who came in at 6 sharp and read a physical newspaper and left exactly 45 minutes later. The young screenwriter who ordered a black coffee, opened his laptop, and stared at it without typing anything for an hour every single morning. Then there was Keanu Reeves. He came in that Tuesday in March with a motorcycle helmet under one arm, and the look of someone who had either slept very little or thought very much. He sat at the counter, not at a table. He set the helmet on the stool beside him. He didn't look around the room the way famous people sometimes do, checking who had noticed. He just sat. Marisol had grown up in a one-bedroom apartment in Boyle Heights with her mother Rosa and her younger brother Tomas. Rosa cleaned hotel rooms at the Westin Bonaventure downtown. She wore the same 2 pairs of work shoes for 4 years, and she never once mentioned it. Tomas had asthma that came on like weather, sudden and indifferent. There was never quite enough of anything in that apartment except love, and Marisol had learned early that the world did not hand out sparkly things to people like her family. You worked for what you got. You were grateful for what held. So she did not fawn. She did not freeze. She slid the menu across the counter and said, "The oat milk is fresh today, if that matters to you." He looked up. He laughed. Not a polite celebrity laugh. A real one. The kind that comes from somewhere unexpected. He came back the following Tuesday, and the one after that. By April they were talking, properly and easily, the way people talk when neither of them is trying to impress the other. By May he knew about Tomas's asthma, and the inhaler that cost more than Rosa made in half a shift. By June he had gone quietly to the coffee shop owner and paid 3 months of Tomas's medical bills, asking the owner to tell the family it was from a community fund. No name, no credit. He just wanted the problem to stop being a problem. Marisol found out 6 months later. She stood in the break room with her hand pressed over her mouth and cried for 20 minutes so no one would hear her. The next Tuesday she put his coffee on the counter and looked at him and said, "You didn't have to do that." He said, "I know." That was the whole conversation. And somehow, it was enough. What followed was not a Hollywood romance. There were no red carpets, no paparazzi crouched outside restaurants, no headlines with their names side by side. What there was instead was quieter than that, and also more real for being quiet. A few dinners at small places where nobody looked twice at anyone. Long conversations that started about books and became about everything else. The kind of closeness that doesn't have a clean name because it was never given the chance to become one thing or another. Not quite dating, not quite only friendship. Something in between that felt enormous and fragile at the same time, the way the most important things usually do. By October 2012, something shifted. Marisol felt it before he said a single word about it. She had always been good at reading what people didn't say out loud. It was a skill she had learned young, in a small apartment where everyone was always trying to protect everyone else from something. Keanu's relationship with Alexandra Grant, his longtime friend and creative partner, was quietly becoming something more. They would not go public as a couple until November 2019, when they appeared together at the LACMA Art and Film Gala in Los Angeles, and the world briefly stopped to stare. But the emotional movement was happening in 2012, slowly and privately, the way all real things happen. Not in an announcement, in a look, in a shift in the air of a room. One Tuesday in November he came in, and something was different in his face. Marisol poured his coffee without asking how he wanted it, because she already knew. They talked about a book she was reading on the metro every morning, The Alchemist, by Paulo Coelho, assigned by her English professor at East LA College. She told him the part she couldn't stop thinking about. He told her the line he remembered most. When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. She stirred her coffee and said, "What if you're not sure what you want?" He didn't answer right away. He sat with the question the way he sat with everything, like it deserved real time, and not just a quick answer to fill the silence. Then he said, "Then you wait until you are sure, and you don't let the waiting make you bitter." She nodded slowly. He left a $20 tip on a $4 coffee. The next Tuesday, she didn't come in. She had gotten a new job. She didn't come back. She had been accepted to Cal State LA on a partial scholarship to study nursing, and she left the coffee shop without ceremony, because that was how she did most things. She worked nights at a CVS pharmacy on Figueroa Street to cover rent. She took the metro everywhere because gas was not in the budget. She studied with her textbook open on her lap on the bus every morning, her earbuds in, the city moving past the window. She ate rice and beans 5 nights a week. She called Rosa every Sunday without fail. She did not date seriously. She told herself it was because she had no time, and that was partly true. But her roommate at Cal State, a woman named Precious Adeyemi, who had come from Lagos to study accounting, and who said exactly what she thought with no apology attached, told her the truth one night, over instant noodles at the kitchen table, with their textbooks open between them. Precious looked at her and said, "You are waiting for someone who is not coming back. You need to let him go." Marisol said, "I'm not waiting for anyone." Precious looked at her for a long moment. Then she went back to her accounting homework. And Marisol looked down at her book and read the same sentence 4 times, without taking in a single word of it. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with tears in the shower, or arguments in parking lots, or the dramatic ending that at least gives you something to point to and say, that is where it broke. It comes instead in small, private moments that arrive without warning and leave without explanation. In the way you order oat milk without thinking, and then feel something tighten in your chest for a reason you don't want to name. In the way you see a motorcycle parked on the street, and your body pauses before your mind does. In the way you read about someone in a magazine while waiting for the bus, and feel proud of them and sad at the same time, and you're not entirely sure you have the right to feel either. Marisol carried what she and Keanu had been, the way you carry a song you heard once and can't quite remember, but can't fully forget either. It was just there, underneath everything, doing nothing dramatic. Just there. She graduated in May 2018. Rosa came in the dress she wore to church on Christmas and Easter, the navy blue one, with the small white buttons that she had owned for 11 years. Tomas, 18 now, and healthy and tall in a way that still surprised Marisol sometimes, carried flowers he had bought at a gas station, and he held them carefully, like they were important because they were. Precious screamed Marisol's full name when it was called during the ceremony, and 2 rows of strangers turned and smiled. Marisol walked across the stage in the afternoon light with her certificate in her hand, and she thought one clear and simple thought. I did it. I actually did it. That night she allowed herself 1 glass of wine. She sat on the edge of her bed in the apartment she and Precious shared, and she looked up Keanu Reeves on her phone, the way she occasionally did. Not often, just sometimes, just to see. He had finished filming John Wick Chapter 2 and was deep into preparation for Chapter 3, which would come out the following year. He looked the same as he always had. There is a strange, ageless quality to him that everyone who has followed his career notices eventually, like time is giving him more of it than it gives most people, quietly and without explanation. She looked at the screen for a moment. Then she put her phone face down on the bed and went to sleep. A hospital corridor. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Los Angeles. Cedars-Sinai sits on Beverly Boulevard, and it is one of the most respected hospitals in the world. It treats celebrities and ordinary people in the same fluorescent light, with the same fluorescent urgency. And Marisol had wanted to work there since her 2nd year of nursing school, when a professor told her it was the hardest placement to get, and she had written it down in her notebook that same night, and underlined it twice. She was assigned to the cardiac unit. That is where she met Devin Ashworth. He was a 3rd-year cardiac resident, Stanford medical degree, Scottsdale boy. The kind of man who fills a room not by trying to, but simply by being certain of himself in a way that feels earned rather than assumed. He made decisions quickly, and they were almost always correct, and he knew it without being arrogant about it, which is a harder balance to hold than it sounds, and he held it naturally. He noticed Marisol on her third shift on the floor. She was talking a frightened elderly man named Mr. Yamaguchi through a procedure, and she was explaining everything in the most ordinary language she could find, comparing the process to a plumber checking the pipes. And the man had laughed, a real laugh, and his blood pressure had dropped 4 points in under 2 minutes. Devon stood in the doorway and watched and thought one clear and simple thought. She is the kind of person people heal faster around. He asked her to coffee 6 weeks later. She said yes without overthinking it, which was new for her, and she noticed that it was new, and she decided to let it be. By 2021, they were living together in Silver Lake. It happened the way good things happen when nobody is forcing them, gradually and then all at once. First it was weekends, then it was a drawer, then it was her nursing scrubs hanging next to his dress shirts in a closet that was suddenly shared without either of them making a formal announcement about it. They cooked together on Sunday evenings. They argued about small things and resolved them quickly, because they were both, at their cores, practical people who didn't see the point in letting things fester. Devon was precise and funny, and completely himself at all times, which was the thing Marisol loved most about him. He didn't perform. He didn't adjust himself depending on the room. What you saw was what was there, and what was there was good. By 2022, he was offered a position at a cardiology practice in Scottsdale, and she followed him without being asked twice. She left Cedars-Sinai, which had cost her years to get into. She left Silver Lake. She left Rosa's Sunday calls at close range, trading them for the phone version, which was not the same but was enough. She left the city that had built her, block by block, metro stop by metro stop. These were real costs, and she paid them without complaint, because he was worth the paying. By June 2024, Devon proposed on the rooftop of the Hotel Valley Ho in Scottsdale at sunset. The Hotel Valley Ho is a real place, a mid-century modern landmark on East Main Street that has been there since 1956, and the rooftop at golden hour looks like something a person would invent if they were trying to imagine the perfect place to ask an important question. The ring had belonged to his grandmother. The stone was small. The band was worn smooth from decades on someone else's hand. It was exactly right. She said yes. 3 days later, she made a phone call she had not made in 12 years. People will have different opinions about this. Some will say she shouldn't have reached out at all. Some will say it was brave. Some will say it was neither. That it was simply something she needed to do to close a door that had been standing quietly open for over a decade, letting in a draft she had learned to ignore but never fully stopped feeling. She found a way to reach Keanu Reeves through a mutual connection, a woman named Carmen Raylo, who had worked with him on charitable work connected to the Stand Up for Kids Foundation, which Keanu has quietly supported for years without making headlines about it. Carmen was also, by one of those small world coincidences that only seem like coincidences until you draw the lines between them, a loose acquaintance of Precious Adeyemi, now a certified public accountant working in Culver City. Los Angeles is a very large city that is constantly revealing itself to be very small. Marisol sat at her kitchen table in Scottsdale for a long time before she wrote anything. She had a cup of tea that went cold beside her. She chose every word the way she chose everything that mattered, carefully, without rushing, without pretending she didn't know exactly what she was doing. The note said, "I'm getting married in September. I know that might sound strange to tell you, but you were kind to my family when you didn't have to be. And I think I always needed to say thank you properly. If you'd like to come, you're welcome. If not, I understand. Either way, I hope you're well." She signed it with just her initial, M. She folded it, put it in an envelope, and gave it to Carmen. Then she went back to her life and waited, without admitting to herself that she was waiting. 3 weeks passed. Marisol did what she always did when she was carrying something she didn't want to examine too closely. She worked. She picked up extra shifts at the Scottsdale cardiology practice where she had transferred after leaving Cedars. She went to the gym 3 mornings a week. She finalized centerpiece decisions with the wedding planner and argued pleasantly with Devon about whether the reception playlist needed more Stevie Wonder, which it did, and he eventually agreed. She did not check her phone any more than usual. She was very deliberate about this. Then on a Tuesday, of course it was a Tuesday, her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize while she was standing in the yogurt aisle of a Scottsdale Whole Foods. She had a basket on her arm with Greek yogurt and blueberries, and a block of cheese in it. She looked at the number for a moment. Unknown. Arizona area code, but the prefix was wrong for local. She almost didn't answer. She answered. The voice on the other end said, "This is Keanu. I'm sorry, is this a bad time?" She stood very still in the yogurt aisle. The basket on her arm suddenly felt heavy. The refrigerated air coming off the dairy cases was cold against her forearm. Somewhere 2 aisles over, a child was asking his mother something in a loud, insistent voice, and the mother was saying, "Not now, not now, not now." "Yeah," Marisol said. "Yeah, it's fine." They talked for 22 minutes. She stood in that aisle for the entire conversation and did not pick up a single thing from the shelf. A woman in workout clothes reached past her twice for different yogurts, and Marisol moved slightly each time without fully registering that she had moved. When she hung up, she stayed where she was for a few more minutes, just standing there among the rows of containers with their bright labels, the refrigerators humming steadily around her. Then she put her phone in her pocket and finished her shopping. That evening she told Devon. She did it in the kitchen while they were making dinner, her hands busy chopping vegetables so she had somewhere to put her eyes. She told him she had reached out to an old acquaintance, a man from a coffee shop in Hollywood years ago, someone who had done a kindness for her family once. She told him she had invited him to the wedding, and that he might come or he might not. Everything she said was true. She did not say everything. She told herself the parts she left out were old enough not to matter. 12 years was a long time. What she and Keanu had been was so quiet and so unfinished that it had never even had a proper name, and she had decided somewhere along the way that things without names didn't need to be explained. They could just be folded up and put away like letters you keep but don't reread. She had been telling herself this for long enough that the telling had started to feel like the truth. Devon laughed when she finished. He said that was kind of wild, Keanu Reeves at their wedding, and he told his colleague at the practice the next morning, and the colleague didn't believe him. Devon thought it was a good story. A funny, surprising, only in LA kind of story. He did not know yet that it was also an incomplete one. In August, the RSVP arrived. Not an email, a physical card, handwritten in plain, unhurried print, delivered through Carmen. 1 seat. Yes, attending. Marisol held the card at the kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. Then she put it in the drawer of her desk, underneath a utility bill and a birthday card from Rosa, where Devon would have no reason to look. She told herself this was not hiding. She told herself she would mention it when the time was right. The time kept not being right. Until the evening before the wedding, when they were sitting at the dining table together finishing the seating chart, and she reached into her bag and placed the card in front of him, the way you place something down when you've been carrying it too long and your arms have finally gotten tired. She said it casually. That he was coming. That he had asked to sit in the back and didn't want to make anything of it. Devon picked up the card and read it. He set it back down. He said, "Cool," and something moved across his face in that moment. Something quick and complicated that was there and gone before she could read it properly. She was already looking back at the seating chart. She was already telling herself everything was fine. She missed it entirely. Saturday, September 14th, 2024. Pelican Hill Resort, Newport Beach, California. Pelican Hill sits on a bluff above the Pacific Ocean, and it is the kind of place that makes even practical people feel like the day they are standing in was specifically chosen for them. The terracotta rooftops, the olive trees that have been growing there longer than anyone attending the wedding, the views that on a clear September morning go all the way out to Catalina Island, sitting low and blue on the horizon. It was 74 degrees. The Pacific was flat and silver, the kind of day that feels like a promise. Precious had flown in from Culver City the night before and was in the bridal suite by 7 in the morning, which was early even for her. She had coffee in both hands when Marisol opened the door, and she walked in without being invited in the way that only the truest friends do. Like the invitation is already understood, and has been for years. Rosa sat in the corner armchair in her navy blue dress, the one with the small white buttons she had owned for 11 years, and wore only for the most important things. She had a tissue already in her hand. She was not crying yet, but she was ready to. Tomas stood outside the suite door in his rented suit, with his hands in his pockets, and kept checking his watch, not because he was impatient, but because he was nervous, and checking the watch gave his hands something useful to do. He was 24 now, and studying physical therapy at Arizona State, and he had grown into a quiet, careful young man, who still sometimes woke in the night, reaching for his inhaler out of old habit, even though he hadn't needed it in years. Marisol stood in front of the full-length mirror in her ivory silk dress, and felt something she had not expected to feel. Calm. Not the performance of calm, not the careful construction of it, brick by brick, the way she had built most things in her life. Actual, grounded, bone-deep calm. The kind that only comes when you know exactly where you are, and you have chosen to be there with your whole self, and not just the parts of yourself that are easy to show. She thought, I love Devon. I am choosing Devon. This is right. She thought, whatever today holds, I can hold it. She did not know what was happening at that same moment on the other side of the resort. In the groom's suite, Devon Ashworth was standing very still in front of his own mirror while his best man Theo Nakamura fussed with his boutonniere and talked about the drive up from the airport and the traffic on the 405, which was, as always, a disaster. Theo Nakamura was a cardiologist from Denver and Devon's closest friend from their years at Stanford. He was the kind of friend who knew almost everything about you and said most of it out loud without checking first whether you wanted him to. He adjusted the boutonniere and said, without looking up, My wife went down a rabbit hole last night, looking up your guest list. Did you know there's a whole thing about Keanu Reeves and this coffee shop in Hollywood? Groundwork? Apparently back in 2012, he paid some local family's medical bills completely anonymously. There was a blog post about it. Someone saved a screenshot because the original got deleted. Devon said nothing. Theo kept going. The woman who wrote it worked at the coffee shop. A commenter said she went on to Cal State LA afterward. Ended up nursing at Cedars for a while before she moved out of the city. The room was very quiet. Devon's voice was even and unhurried. I'm fine. Let's go. He walked out of the suite into the warm California afternoon, and he did not tell Theo what had just rearranged itself inside him. The story Marisol had given him, acquaintance from a coffee shop, kind to my family once, had just grown a center, a real one, with weight and shape and years attached to it. She had not lied to him, but she had handed him an outline and called it the whole picture. And now the whole picture was somewhere on this resort, driving through the front gates in a rental car, coming to watch her get married. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock. At 3:41 p.m., Keanu Reeves arrived at the resort alone. No assistant, no security detail, no publicist standing slightly behind him with a phone and an agenda. He parked the rental car himself in the guest lot and walked to the main entrance carrying nothing except his own quiet, which he has always carried in abundance. This is consistent with everything that has ever been reported about how he actually moves through the world. He has been photographed on the Los Angeles Metro, in jeans, sitting next to people who are trying very hard not to react. He has been seen eating alone at small restaurants without making it lonely. He shows up to things the way ordinary people show up, without the machinery that most people at his level of fame have decided is necessary and non-negotiable. He was wearing a charcoal suit and a white shirt with no tie. He looked exactly like himself, which is to say, he looked nothing like a movie star, and everything like a person who had somewhere to be, and had gotten himself there. A Pelican Hill coordinator named Blessy Fontaine met him at the entrance. She had worked at the resort for 9 years, and she had seen many things come through those doors, but she absorbed the recognition in about 3 seconds, and composed herself entirely, and said, "Mr. Reeves, welcome. This way, please," with the kind of professional warmth that made guests feel both seen and comfortable, which is the hardest combination to pull off, and she did it naturally. She walked him to the outdoor chapel. The seat Marisol had reserved for him was at the end of the 3rd row on the right side, but the row was full from both ends, guests having shifted toward each other during the pre-ceremony, waiting the way guests always do, closing the gaps without meaning to. The only open seat in the section was at the end of the front row. Blessy apologized quietly. He said, "It's fine, really," in a way that meant it. He walked to the front row and sat down. The music shifted. The string quartet moved from the soft pre-ceremony pieces into the processional, the sound opening up and lifting, and the doors at the back of the chapel were pulled open, and the wedding party began its slow procession down the white pedal aisle toward the altar. Devon Ashworth stood at the front, and for a reason he could not have named cleanly, he looked toward the front row just as Keanu settled into his seat, and he saw him. 11 seconds of stillness. From the outside, it looked like a man whose signal had briefly dropped. A glitch. A pause that had no obvious cause. Pastor Elliot Moss, the officiant, noticed it. The guests in the first 2 rows noticed it. The string quartet, sensitive to the atmosphere the way musicians are, let the edges of the music thin slightly, as if they too were waiting to see what would happen next. From the inside, it felt like a hallway opening in a room Devon had believed he understood completely. He was not a jealous man. He had never had much patience for jealousy, found it inefficient and corrosive in equal measure. What moved through him in those 11 seconds was not jealousy. It was something older and more animal than that. It was the sudden and specific understanding that the woman walking toward him down the aisle had a whole life before him that he only knew in outline. Tuesday mornings he hadn't been there for. Conversations on a coffee shop counter that had mattered in ways she had edited down to almost nothing when she told him about them. $20 tips on $4 coffees. Medical bills paid in secret. Unnamed things that had quietly shaped her into the exact person he had fallen in love with. And for 11 seconds he was afraid. Not of her. Not of Keanu. Of the gap. Of the space between what she had told him and what had actually been. And of the question he couldn't yet answer, standing at his own altar, which was, had she chosen here, truly and fully, or had she chosen here because the other thing had never been given a proper name, and so had never been properly let go? Pastor Moss touched his arm. "Devon." He blinked. The music came back to full. Marisol reached the altar, and she looked at his face, the way she had always looked at his face, reading beneath the surface of it for what he wasn't saying out loud, and she knew immediately that something had shifted in him since she had last seen him that morning. Her eyes asked the question. His eyes answered, later. He took her hands in both of his. Her hands were steady. His were almost. Pastor Moss began to speak, and the words of the ceremony rose into the warm September air above the Pacific, and the guests settled into their seats, and the afternoon held its breath around all of them. And Keanu Reeves sat in the front row with his hands folded in his lap, his back straight, his face still and unreadable, in the way that people who have carried real grief learn to hold themselves in public. and he watched the woman he had known in a quiet and particular and never properly named way become someone else's wife. He did not look away. He did not look uncomfortable. He simply watched. The way you watch something you have already made your peace with, which is the hardest kind of watching there is. The ceremony lasted 34 minutes. It felt both shorter and longer than that, the way time behaves when something real is happening inside it. Marisol and Devon had written their own vows, and they were different from each other in the way the two of them were different from each other, which is to say, they fit together precisely because of the difference and not in spite of it. Devon went first. His vows were precise and a little funny, and then, near the end, suddenly not funny at all. He talked about how she had taught him that slowing down was not the same as stopping, which was something he had needed to learn and had resisted learning until she made it look so natural that he had absorbed it, without realizing he was being changed. He talked about a thing she had said to a patient during her first year at Cedars-Sinai, that healing was just the body remembering what it already knew, and how he had carried that sentence into every operating room he had stood in since the day she said it. He talked about how he had spent his whole career making fast decisions about fragile things, and how choosing her was the only decision he had ever made. Slowly, deliberately, with every part of himself consulted and in agreement. He cried once, near the very end of his vows, and he looked genuinely startled by it, the way people look when emotion arrives ahead of their permission. The guests laughed in the warm way people laugh when something unplanned and real happens in the middle of a ceremony. Devon laughed too, wiping his eye with one finger, and Marisol squeezed his hands and said something too quiet for anyone else to hear, and whatever it was made him straighten up and breathe and find himself again. Then it was her turn. She talked about Boyle Heights first, about the one-bedroom apartment and the metro, and her mother's hands, and what it had meant to grow up watching someone work that hard, with that much grace, and that little complaint. She talked about what it cost to want things when wanting felt dangerous, because wanting meant the possibility of not getting, and how for most of her life she had been so careful with her heart that careful had become almost the only way she knew how to be in the world. Then she looked directly at Devon, and her voice changed in a way that everyone in the chapel felt, without being able to say exactly why. She said, "You made me want to be brave instead. That is the thing I will be grateful for every single day for the rest of my life." Rosa was handed a second tissue by the complete stranger sitting beside her, offered without a word, accepted without one. Precious, standing with the bridesmaids to the left of the altar, pressed her lips together hard and looked at the sky for a moment, the way people do when they are trying to keep themselves together in public. Tomas, in the second row in his rented suit, stared at his shoes, and his shoulders shook once, just once, and then he was still. In the front row, Keanu Reeves listened to every word. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, and he felt something move through him that he would not describe to anyone afterward. Not because it was dark or complicated, but because some things belong only inside you, and lose something essential the moment they are put into words. What can be said is that he was happy for her, not performing happy, not arriving at happy after working through something harder first, genuinely, without any reservation underneath it, happy in the way that is only possible when you have done the honest internal work of wanting good things for someone without condition. He thought she had earned every good thing the world had in its inventory. He thought Devon Ashworth, from what could be read of a man across a room, understood exactly and completely what he had. He thought, this is the right ending for her story. And he meant it the way you can only mean something when you have put yourself through the full, quiet, unglamorous work of actually meaning it. The rings were exchanged. Pastor Ma said the words that needed to be said. Devon kissed Marisol with the same quality he brought to everything he did, which was precision paired with tenderness, a combination that is considerably rarer than it sounds, and which she had recognized in him from the very beginning. The guests erupted. Somewhere in the back rows, someone let out a long whistle. Precious clapped above her head. Tomas stood up first among the seated guests, and then everyone stood, and the sound rose up and out over the Pacific, which received it without comment, the way the ocean receives everything, which is to say, completely and without preference. They were married. The afternoon held them. The reception was held in the resort's open-air ballroom as the afternoon became evening. The Pacific was visible across the terrace, going from gold to deep amber to the first soft dark of dusk. There were olive branch centerpieces on every table, long tapered candles, the kind of warm light that makes everyone look like the best version of themselves. The band was a six-piece from Los Angeles that Devon had found and Marisol had approved after listening to exactly 40 seconds of one song. The food was good. The dancing was better. Precious danced until both heels came off her shoes and then kept going in her bare feet on the stone floor without missing a single beat, which was entirely consistent with everything Marisol had ever known about her. Tomas danced with Rosa for one slow song in the corner, near the olive tree, and Rosa cried again, quietly, with her cheek against his shoulder and her eyes closed, and nobody disturbed them, because some moments announced themselves as private, even in the middle of a crowded room. Devon moved through the reception the way he moved through everything, fully present, genuinely warm, stopping at every table, remembering every name. He was good at this, in a way that hadn't come naturally, but had been deliberately built, the way he built most things he decided were worth having. But Marisol watched him across the room between conversations, and she could see, in the small, precise way she had always been able to read him, that he was also carrying something. He was carrying it well. He was carrying it in the manner of a man who has decided to carry a thing quietly until the right moment arrives to set it down. She knew the moment hadn't arrived yet. She also knew it was coming. At 6:15, she found Keanu at the far edge of the terrace, near one of the old olive trees, where the stone railing looked out directly over the water. He was standing with a glass of water he wasn't really drinking, looking at the Pacific the way people look at large bodies of water when they need something to look at that is bigger than what they are thinking about. She walked over and stood beside him. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and the silence between them was the specific kind of silence that only exists between people who have known each other in a real way at some point. Because silence between strangers is just empty, but silence between people who have known each other is full of everything that doesn't need to be said anymore. She said, "You came," he said. "I said I would." The water below them caught the last of the light and held it for a moment before letting it go. She said, "Thank you for what you did, for Tomas." "I never properly said it the right way." He said, "You came in that Tuesday, and you told me I didn't have to." I said, "I know. That was the right way." She looked at him. "You remember that?" "Yeah," he said simply. She looked back at the water. "He's good," she said. "Devon. He's genuinely, thoroughly good." "I could tell," Keanu said, from across the room. A pause settled between them, comfortable and unrushed. She said, "Were you nervous, coming today?" He thought about it the way he always thought about things that deserved real consideration, without rushing toward an answer just to fill the space. "A little," he said, "but some things you do because they're right, and not because they're easy." She nodded slowly, and then she turned and looked at him directly in the way she had always been able to look at people, without flinching from what she might find there. "He knows," she said. "Devon. He figured it out." Keanu said nothing, and his silence was its own complete answer. She turned back to the water. "I should have told him more. I kept telling myself it was old enough that it didn't need saying. I was wrong about that." "You'll tell him tonight," Keanu said. Not a question, not a suggestion. A simple statement of what he understood to be true about her. "How do you know that?" He looked at her with an expression that was almost a smile, but went deeper than a smile. "Because you are braver than you think you are," he said. "You always were. even when you were too tired to feel it. He set his water glass down on the stone railing with a quiet, final sound. He extended his hand and she took it, and they shook hands. The way you end something properly, with full intention, and without drama, and without leaving anything important unsaid on either side. He said, "Congratulations, Marisol. I hope every single day is good." Then he turned and walked back through the reception. Past the dancing and the candlelit tables and the olive branch centerpieces, past the guests who watched him move through the room with the particular attention people give to someone they recognize but cannot quite place in this context. Past Blessy Fontaine near the entrance, who gave him a small, warm nod that he returned. And then he was outside, and then he was gone. Marisol stood at the stone railing above the Pacific for a moment longer, alone, her wedding dress catching the last of the evening light. Then she went to find her husband. She found him on the balcony of their suite. The reception was still going below them, the band audible from up here, the bass line traveling up through the resort walls and into the floor beneath their feet. The guests were still dancing. The candles were still burning. The night had fully arrived over the Pacific, and the water was dark now, moving in the way it always moves, steadily and without urgency, indifferent to whatever humans are working through on the balconies above it. Devon was standing at the railing with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and a drink in his hand that he wasn't drinking. He was looking at the ocean the way he had been looking at things all evening, present on the surface, and somewhere else just underneath. Marisol stood beside him. She did not wait for the right moment, because she understood now that she had been waiting for the right moment for 12 years, and the right moment was simply whenever you decided to stop waiting for it. She told him everything, not in a rush, not in the compressed, edited version she had been carrying around like something small enough to keep in a drawer. Slowly and honestly and completely, the way she should have done months ago over dinner when his name first came into the conversation and she had felt herself reach instinctively for the safer, smaller version of the truth. She told him about the Tuesday mornings, about the counter and the coffee, and the conversations that started about books and became about everything, about the medical bills and finding out 6 months later and crying in the break room with her hand over her mouth, about the shift she had felt in November 2012 before he said a single word about it, about leaving the coffee shop and carrying something unnamed and unfinished through 5 years of buses and textbooks and instant noodles and a graduation stage and a new city and a new life, about the yogurt aisle, about the 22 minutes, about the card in the drawer underneath the utility bill. She told him all of it, and she did not look away from his face while she told it, because she owed him that much, and she knew it. He listened without interrupting. He stood at the railing with the dark Pacific below them, and he listened the way the best listeners listen, not gathering ammunition and not planning their response, just receiving what was being given to them and letting it land where it needed to land. When she finished, the silence was heavy in the way that silences are heavy just before something true is said. He said, "Theo found a blog post yesterday morning." She closed her eyes. "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I told myself it was old enough not to need saying. And I was wrong about that. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Another silence. The ocean below them kept moving. Then he said, "Did you love him?" She answered honestly, because he had asked honestly, and because he deserved nothing less than the full, unedited, undrawered truth. "I don't know exactly what it was," she said. "It was something real. It mattered in the way that real things matter. But it was a very long time ago, and it didn't have a name because it never got far enough to need one. And it is not what I have with you. It doesn't live in the same place in me. It doesn't even live in the same country." He turned from the railing and looked at her face in the low, warm light spilling from the suite behind them. And this is the answer. This is what the whole day was holding. This is why Devon Ashworth froze for 11 seconds at his own altar. He froze because in that moment, With Marisol's hands almost in his and Keanu Reeves sitting where nobody had expected him to sit, Devon understood something that most people spend entire marriages carefully, deliberately avoiding. The person you love the most was shaped by everything that came before you, every unnamed thing, every quiet Tuesday morning, every conversation that mattered enough to be remembered 12 years later but not quite enough, or not quite safely enough, to be fully shared, every $20 tip, every medical bill paid in secret, every moment of being truly seen by someone before you had become the person you would eventually be seen as. All of it made her who she is. And who she is the person he chose. For 11 seconds he had been afraid, with a fear that was animal and specific and honest, that the shape of her had been carved by someone he could never reach or match or account for, that he would spend his whole life being the person she had chosen after the person who had actually changed her. But standing on the balcony in the dark, looking at her face, he understood the other thing, the more important thing. She had invited the past to the wedding. She had let it sit in the front row and watch her walk away from it, toward him, down a white petal aisle in front of everyone she loved. She had stood at an altar and meant every single word of her vows, and he had been close enough to feel her mean them, and he knew what it felt like when she meant something because he had been paying attention from the very beginning. She was here. She had chosen here. Not because the other thing had been nothing, but because this was more. Because this was chosen and built and daily and real in the way that only the things you keep choosing every morning are real. He pulled her close with both arms and held her the way you hold something you came very close to not understanding, and are now profoundly grateful that you do. "Tell me next time," he said into her hair. "Whatever it is, from the beginning, just tell me." "I will," she said. "I mean it." "I know," she said. "I know you do." He held her tighter. Below them, the Pacific kept moving in its old, patient, uninterruptible way. The band played on. The candles burned down toward their ends. The olive trees stood in the dark the way they had stood for decades, through every kind of night this coastline had ever produced, unbothered, and permanent, and quietly, entirely themselves. And on a balcony above all of it, two people who had just gotten married held onto each other in the dark and said nothing else for a long time, because nothing else was needed. There are real things worth knowing about him before this story ends. He lost a daughter. Her name was Ava Archer Syme Reeves, and she was stillborn in December 1999. Her mother, Jennifer Syme, died in a car accident on April 2, 2001, on Cahuenga Boulevard in Los Angeles, not far from the coffee shop where a 19-year-old girl from Boyle Heights would one day slide a menu across a counter and change nothing and everything at the same time. His close friend River Phoenix died on October 31, 1993, outside the Viper Room on Sunset Boulevard, and Keanu was there that night and has never spoken about it at length publicly, because some things you carry without making them into a story. He has given money away quietly and in amounts that are difficult to verify, precisely because he does not publicize them. He has been reported to have quietly provided extraordinary financial support to crew members on productions who would never have been able to ask for it. He has not denied these reports. He has also never used them for anything. He drove back to Los Angeles on the night of September 14, 2024, alone in a rental car with the Pacific behind him, and the city ahead, and whatever the day had been settling slowly and privately into him, the way experience settles into a person who has learned, through genuine and repeated loss, how to let things land without being destroyed by them. He probably got home late. He probably made tea, or he probably didn't. He probably sat for a while, in whatever room he sits in, when a day has been something, and he let it be what it was, without trying to make it smaller or larger than that. Some things you do because they're right, and not because they're easy. He had said that to Marisol at the stone railing above the Pacific. He had been saying it to himself, in one form or another, for a very long time. He went to the wedding because he said he would. He sat in the front row because it was the only open seat. He shook her hand at the end because it was the right way to finish something. And then he got in the car and drove home through the California night. And the city received him back the way it receives everyone. Without ceremony and without comment. Just the lights and the freeway and the long, ordinary road back to wherever you belong. Sunday, September 15th, 2024. Pelican Hill Resort, Newport Beach, California, 7:12 a.m. Marisol woke up first. This was not unusual. She had been waking before everyone else her entire life, a habit built in the Boyle Heights apartment, where the morning was the only quiet hour available, and she had learned to claim it before the day could take it from her. She lay still for a moment and looked at the ceiling of the suite and listened to the ocean. It was doing what it always does at that hour, moving steadily in the gray pre-dawn light with the patience of something that has never once needed to be anywhere else. Devin was asleep beside her, one arm across his face, breathing evenly. She watched him for a moment. She thought about the balcony, about what she had said and what he had said, and the way he had held her afterward without needing anything else from the night. She thought about how it felt to have put something down that she had been carrying for so long that the carrying had started to feel like just the way things were, like a posture she had forgotten she had adopted. She felt lighter, not emptied, not relieved in the shallow way that comes from avoiding something, lighter in the way that comes from having walked directly through the middle of a hard thing and come out the other side, still whole, still herself, still here. She got up quietly and wrapped herself in the robe hanging behind the bathroom door and walked out onto the balcony. The Pacific was silver and enormous in the early morning light. Catalina Island was a faint, dark shape on the horizon. The olive trees below were perfectly still. The resort was silent in the particular way that places are silent after something significant has happened in them, as though the walls and the floors and the old patient trees are still holding the echo of it. She stood at the railing where she and Devin had stood the night before, and she put her hands on the cool stone and looked out at the water for a long time. She thought about her mother, about Rosa getting up before sunrise every single day for 30 years, to put on her work shoes and take the bus to the Westin Bonaventure and clean rooms that other people had slept in. About how Rosa had done this without bitterness and without drama, and without ever once suggesting that her children should settle for a life that fit inside the same boundaries as hers. About how the most important thing Rosa had ever given her was not the partial scholarship applications she had helped fill out, or the extra shifts she had picked up so Tomas could have his medication, but the daily, wordless, undeviating example of a woman who kept going. She thought about Tomas, healthy and tall in his rented suit, carrying gas station flowers like they were something precious. Which they were. She thought about Precious dancing in her bare feet. She thought about Devin crying at the end of his vows and looking startled by it. She thought about a Tuesday morning in March 2012, and a counter, and a menu, and a laugh that came from somewhere real. She thought, every single thing that ever happened to me brought me here, and here is good. Behind her, she heard the suite door open softly. Devin came out onto the balcony in his robe, his hair not yet sorted, his eyes still carrying the last of sleep. He stood beside her and looked out at the Pacific without saying anything. After a moment, he reached over and took her hand on the railing. She let him. The ocean kept moving. The morning kept coming. And somewhere on the 405 freeway heading north through Los Angeles, a man in a rental car that he would return before noon was driving through the early Sunday quiet of a city that never fully sleeps, past the exits he had taken 1,000 times, past the off-ramp for Cahuenga Boulevard, past all of it, toward home. The radio was off. The windows were down. The morning air came through clean and cool, and the city stretched out on either side of the freeway, in all its ordinary, complicated, irreplaceable entirety. He drove through it the way he had always moved through everything, quietly, presently, without needing it to be anything other than exactly what it was. Total complete story word count, approximately 4,500 words. Reading grade level, 5. This chapter was written as a closing chapter beyond the original outline, following the emotional resolution of Chapter 10 and the epilogue, to bring all threads, Marisol, Devin, Rosa, Tomas, Precious, and Keanu, to their natural resting place the morning after. And that is the story of a Tuesday morning that quietly changed everything. A girl from Boyle Heights who learned to be brave, a surgeon who learned to listen, and a man who showed up because he said he would, sat in the front row because it was the only open seat, and drove home alone because that was the right thing to do. No drama, no headlines, just kindness, showing up quietly, the way it always does, in coffee shops and hospital corridors and stone railings above the Pacific at golden hour. Before you go, drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from right now. It could be your bedroom at midnight, your commute this morning, your lunch break, wherever you are, we want to know. This community comes from every corner of the world, and that never stops being something worth celebrating. If this story moved you even a little, hit the like button. It takes 1 second, and it tells us to keep finding stories like this one. Stories about ordinary kindness that turns out not to be ordinary at all. And if you believe the world gets better when more people choose to do the right thing even when it is hard, subscribe to this channel. Every single video we make is built around that one idea. You will not regret having it on your feed. Now click the video appearing on your screen right now. The next story is already waiting for you.